seemed nearly invincible.
Smash. Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more Lewitton, and this time I believe this is the video that I should have watched first from him to get that foundational understanding of Warhammer 40k before diving into that the Imperium of Man history, which I do still plan on watching the part 2. It's just that video is so long. It's over an hour. It's an hour and a half long on its own without my added commentary, so I keep pushing it off. But today we are watching Dark Beginnings, Necrons, Old Ones, and Eldar. Warhammer 40,000 lore/history. Before I dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. Would love it if you join the Discord and follow me over at Twitch. And please do go check out the gaming channel here on a YouTube. And then for those that may be new to the channel, I feel like I'll say this maybe once every few videos or so, just in case, for those that have not heard me say it yet. I am not currently publishing. You cannot purchase or read any of my works as of yet. I am trying to go the traditional publishing route because self-publishing is very expensive, because I am very, kind of perfectionist in it. I want a lot of things done a certain way, which leads to higher costs. And as someone who really has not done that sort of business before, I think it would just be a very bad idea and potentially just cause me to spend more money and time than it would probably make sense to do. So I'm trying the traditional publishing route. If I end up suddenly with a shit ton of money, you will quickly be able to tell, because one of the first things I'll probably do with said shit ton of money would be to self-publish. But anyways, yeah, trying to traditionally publish. I have written and edited 5 books, but really I have written probably 6 or 7 in full. It's just, I personally believe that I've said this before, I'll keep saying it as part of this little yap session here that I'll do now and again. I believe to be an author, editing is just as important of the process. So really you have to, I don't think it counts until you really have gone through, at the very least, a second draft entirely of your book, of your story. So all that said, I don't really know how else to advertise my writing either. I need to work on. I do know I probably should talk about my books more in depth and exactly what you guys can expect from them, but it kind of changes from one book to the next while I try and figure out, as I go along, figuring out what I feel like works best for the world and whatnot, and what the themes and such. But anyways, with all that said, let's go ahead and dive into the Necrons, Old Ones, and Eldar. Whew. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only... My inner Orcum came about, said Wog. I'm saying it anyway. Wog!
This is Luton.
Smash.
Welcome to my new series exploring the universe of Warhammer 40,000. 40k is a vast and fascinating universe with lore so complicated.
You can really tell he definitely made a lot of progress from this video to his Imperium of Man, in terms of just general quality.
You could spend a literal...
We'll see how this is only an 18-minute video, so I'm curious how well, if right, there are some times where information kind of better fits. These kind of lore videos kind of fit either, shorter, or is it justified in spending like the hour plus on a video? Right.
literally
We'll
weeks
see.
discussing it. So one of the most difficult choices for me was where to begin with it. Now, the universe of 40k is such a mass of cross-referenced nuances and interlinked stories of revenge, justice, hatred and brutality. It's like trying to explain the whole of human history to an alien race. So breaking the lore of 40k down into YouTube videos is quite a complicated matter. Now, one last thing to mention is that Games Workshop themselves have stated that in the 41st millennium, information is fragmented, intercepted, distorted, suppressed, and often flat out just false. So with this in mind, a lot of 40k lore, beyond stuff that you would consider out and out facts, can be regarded more as hearsay than something that's just set in stone. This is especially true of ancient lore and race histories. This is in part because it allows Games Workshop to make changes to the universe without upsetting devout players, but it also makes a lot of sense in reality where war has been raging since almost the beginning of time. Also, if you look at humanity, it's often true that history is written by the victors, and so with that in mind, you might expect some facts within the universe of 40k to be anything from an eyewitness account to complete misinformation, which then, translates to becoming the gospel word as it's passed down through the ages.
That's a beautiful shot. I like that. I like this beautiful image.
So where do we start our journey into the grim darkness of the 41st millennium? At the beginning, of course. We leave the Imperium of Mankind behind and travel some 60 million years before to the earliest time where one peaceful, hyper-advanced race were masters of their own destinies. These beings are simply referred to as the Old Ones, and they are, as far as recorded, the first sentient life in the universe. Their lives focused on the acquisition of knowledge and to seed the universe with life, terraforming and creating new species, including one unintelligent ape-like species on a small blue planet in the Milky Way. Now, very little
I've never heard of them.
Specific details exist around the Old Ones themselves, but the story of their place in the grand scheme of things is where we will begin. Now, the Old Ones had great psychic powers and built many wonders of godlike beauty and size, and it was this vast understanding of the universe that allowed them to manipulate alternate dimensions and begin constructing their arguably greatest achievement, known as the Webway. Now, as its name describes, this is a web of pathways that allowed the Old Ones to travel through a vast sea of dimensional energy known as the Warp. The Warp was a dangerous and disruptive expanse of powerful psychic energy, parallel to real space, although in the early times it was a lot more passive than it is in the 41st millennium, where it's extremely full of dark, horrific, chaotic energy. So to
and I'm assuming, right, as I said before, so some people had a problem with me saying, the guardsmen being just sent to their deaths as cannon fodder is not, aiding heresy, because not aiding chaos, because, you got to fight it. Well, it's like, you can fight it with smarter tactics, not just human wave tactics, You can be smarter about how you fight, okay? Right? Shouldn't you be fucking, even though they've got a bajillion fucking people, you keep sending them to their deaths. Eventually they're gonna run out, but also let's say theoretically that they just cannot run out of lives. You are still actively aiding the enemy if you just send them pointlessly to the deaths. You gotta have strategy. Okay? Alright, so if they are just being stupidly sacrificed and sent to their deaths as purely just cannon fodder, then that is actively aiding chaos. Now, of course, perhaps they do have genuine strategy to try and minimize the death. I do not know, based upon the information that I have here, but if they do have strategy, then of course, then they are not actively aiding chaos if they are trying to avoid just getting their soldiers killed. Right, okay. We've established that. I forgot what else I was trying to say.
travel through it though, at this time it still required protected psychic pathways, and that's what they constructed. The Webway enabled the Old Ones to travel across unimaginable distances at incredible speed, essentially crossing space that would take millennia comparatively.
So I'm assuming that this video is going to talk about how the warp became as chaotic as it is.
Instantaneously, enabling them to reach the far corners of the universe. They believed that all life was useful, and they are known to have brought about the rise of numerous important species and formed thousands of worlds, which they also made their own. As the Old Ones expanded, they encountered other advanced species, although none as far as themselves, once again remembering we are at this time millennia before the dawn of mankind. One such race the Old Ones happened across were known as the Necrontyr. The Necrontyr's planet of origin was barren. It was radiation blasted due to their violent nearby star, making their home incredibly hostile to life. Their bodies were riddled with radiation sickness, and they lived extremely short lives, constantly preparing for their inevitable deaths. Their cities were built in anticipation of their demise, little more than vast tomb complexes with a few temporary homes for the living. Now, they vainly tried to improve their mortality through scientific means, but after centuries they were consigned to the fact that their bodies could not be changed to survive on their home planet. Somehow though, despite this, they altered their plans to instead reach to the stars in a bid to escape their cursed cyclical fate of painful, unending death. And this is where they were to encounter the Old Ones. However, while the Old Ones were able to travel anywhere in space in mere steps and possessed near immortal length of life, the Necrontyr could not have been more opposite. They had to use slow-moving, non-warp ready ships equipped with stasis crypts that enabled the short-lived crew to survive out amongst the stars. They clad their ships in living metal, which was a metal literally that grows and lives like that of an organic material. And this was to allow it to withstand the rigours of spaceflight. Despite this though, colonization for the Necrontyr was a slow and painful process, as was everything in their history. But upon meeting the Old Ones and seeing their secrets of near immortality sparked a hope was raised within the Necrontyr. They finally saw a chance to be saved from their pain, a chance to live. And they petitioned the Old Ones for the secret of eternal life, but were refused this knowledge. In many ways, this refusal of knowledge doomed the universe to its fate of unending war and the events that were to follow. The Necrontyr burned with the resentment and hatred of the Old Ones and their unwillingness to save them from their pain and suffering. In addition to this, the Necrontyr Empire were battling brutal civil wars known as the Wars of Secession, which the various dynasties of Necrontyr were battling one another. The encounter with the Old Ones led the Triarch, the ruling council over all the Necrontyr, believed that an external foe would unify their species, and their bitterness to the Old Ones led to war, and it worked. The prospects of vast spoils and the secret to immortality brought the Necrontyr dynasties together to launch their campaign against the Old Ones. Their hopes, however, were typically short-lived, as the Necrontyr were unable to match or outmaneuver the Old Ones, whose use of the Webway enabled them to always reinforce, preempt, and win battles against the Necrontyr.
And also, the Necrontyr can't live for long. They're pretty short-lived themselves.
Eventually, conceding defeat, the Necrontyr were forced to retreat to their homeworlds, defeated and, importantly, more bitter and full of hatred for the Old Ones than ever before. At this time, the Old Ones forgot about the Necrontyr. They'd been vanquished.
So who threw hands first? Was it the Necrontyr that threw hands first after being spurned? Or were the Old Ones like, no, and then fist to the face? I feel like I might have zoned out when he said who attacked first, but I feel like he also did not say who attacked. I remember that.
But the Necrontyr had no intention of dying out so silently. Instead, they redoubled their efforts to find new weapons to destroy the Old Ones and achieve what they sought so passionately, the secret to immortality. During their research for new weapons, they became aware of creatures living from the destructive solar radiation from their sun. These life forms were named the Satan, star gods in the Necrontyr's language. And the Satan at this early time were not particularly aware of anything beyond their need to absorb raw energy and power. Their godlike energy seemed nearly invincible to the Necrontyr, the perfect weapon to unleash against the Old Ones, but if only they could harness that power. And they did through their living metal. They constructed bodies, empty husks, shells for the Satan to inhabit. and it's unknown how they contacted the C'tan initially, but through some means they encouraged the C'tan to take physical form using the living metal bodies that were constructed. Now, a C'tan known as the Deceiver spoke with Zarek, the Silent King, Lord of the Necrontyr trio.
God, I still, every time I hear that name, the Silent King. Oh, fucking, you know whoever came up with that name, the Silent King, as they were writing it down, when they put that pen to paper, they were like, oh, that's a fucking banger. Right? They knew. You knew that once that name came out, whoever fucking created it, they were like, what if we had this dude called the Silent King, leader of the Necrontyr? You just know everyone that heard that name was like, that's a fucking banger. That just goes hard. It goes unnecessarily hard. I fucking love that name.
And told him how long ago the Old Ones and C'tan had also been at war, but the C'tan were defeated and scattered. This common foe brought the Necrontyr and C'tan to a close alliance, and the Necrontyr began to worship them as gods for their supreme power. But as the C'tan, once without conception of the world around them, became more manifest and intelligent, it was clear they were not the salvation that had been hoped for. The C'tan offered Zarek an offer for his race: immortality. But this was not to be the immortality of the Old Ones, but that of living metal shells that they had created for the C'tan. They proposed that a great period of biotransference would take place to give all Necrontyr that which they craved most: unending life. In his desperation for victory, glory, and immortality, the Necrontyr Zarek agreed to transfer all other Necrontyrs into living metal bodies, that their flesh would be destroyed, but their minds and essence would live forever. This, however, was the biggest tragedy ever to befall the Necrontyr. Their minds were dulled to that of soulless drones, and only a few leaders maintained some semblance of their former selves, including Zarek, and it was at this time that Zarek realized he had made a terrible, terrible mistake,
He had made
and
an
doomed his entire race. The C'tan turned the Necrontyr into slaves, ruling over them with extreme disregard and cruelty. The Necrontyr were extinguished from the universe forever, and the time of the Necrons had begun. But worse was still to come. We now return to the Old Ones, who during this time were largely unaware of the Necrontyr's demise, or the resurrection of their ancient enemy, the C'tan. This ignorance would prove catastrophic, as the Old Ones were left with no time to prepare an adequate defense against one of the most destructive wars in the history of the entire universe, known in the ancient history of the 41st millennium as the War in Heaven. So named, it was a war literally between gods and on a scale of unimaginable proportions, making...
I'm assuming that then this war is what causes the chaos of the war that we have today.
The wars between races in the current time of Warhammer 40,000 seem like mere skirmishes by comparison. This war against the Old Ones was very different to the first. The Necrons not only had more advanced weaponry, they now were protected in their immortal living metal form, and the Old Ones' mastery of the warp and webways was continually countered by the C'tan with their immense power over the material universe. In this time, the C'tan spread out like vicious predators, consuming entire worlds, feasting on the creations of the Old Ones, who now retreated to only their strongest bastions to plan a way out of complete annihilation. And all the while, entire worlds were razed, suns extinguished, and entire star systems devoured by the uncontainable C'tan. The Old Ones had now retreated to the Webway, only venturing out when it was essential, but even these once impenetrable paths were not untainted by the fury of the Necron. Facing complete extinction, the Old Ones seeded new life they hoped would protect them. These new races would have powerful psychic abilities to defend against the C'tan. The early creations were the Eldar, the Knib, and the Rashan, and whilst the Eldar would live through to the
I don't think I've heard of the other two.
current time, almost nothing is known of the fate of the Knib or the Rashan, and it's entirely possible they were destroyed completely by the C'tan and Necrons, with only the Eldar surviving this early time. Among their other creations were also those which would become mankind, beasts that lived in their own ecosystem but had no specific role defined for them by the Old Ones and were left to their own natural evolution. During these ancient times, the Eldar learnt a great many secrets of the warp from the Old Ones, who regularly visited them, mentoring them on how to control their psychic powers and learn to use the warp. Eldar legends originating from this time state that they were raised by figures of shadow and light, referring to them as First Ones. It is said they were the first to have reached into the starry night and to be older than gods, yet mortal and subject to time. They are said to have left the Eldar and returned to the sky in order to allow their charges to develop over millennia. They would return later in strange, vast vessels, but that were worn and scarred. This was of course due to them being engaged in an unending war against the Satan, with the Old Ones returning to inspect the Eldar and judge if they were fit for the war ahead. The Old Ones are known to have aided their younger race in focusing their psychic abilities to create warp-derived entities and use them as weapons against the vampiric gods of starlight, which of course is a reference to the Satan. Now the Eldar legends continue stating that in the time of the First Ones, now dwindling in number to the point that they lost influence among the Eldar. And without their creator's sensibility and guidance, the Eldar's psychic creations born from the warp itself changed from sentient weapons into living gods of the Immaterium, who were the very, very first of their kind, and this change instigated not only the final catastrophe for the First Ones, but in time would come back to haunt the Eldar themselves with apocalyptic consequences. The war in heaven continued, and by the time the Old Ones had prepared their forces, there were only 4 Satan in existence. But swathes of other life forms in the galaxy the Old Ones had seeded were already extinguished. The Old Ones finally unleashed the new races, sending the Necrons reeling as the power of the warp was an anathema to them, and they struggled to contain the advance of this new offensive. In response, the Satan unified for the first time in millions of years. However, now a new and devastating unforeseen side effect of the Old One's creations began to manifest in this period as the young race's psychic development disturbed the energies of the warp itself. And from this pure energy came mass and form, and older warp entities became predatory as the warp began to become a more hostile environment. Cracks in reality would appear, and the entities of the warp saw entry into the material universe, forcing the Old Ones again to bring about the emergence of new species to defend their final strongholds. They were now under assault from so many different directions, they barely had anywhere left to turn. Among their creations included the green-skinned, ultra-violent Croc, later known as Orcs, and the technologically adept Jakiro. Now though, the Old Ones, even with their vast knowledge of creation and their near immortal lifespan, had run out of time. With their interstellar network being breached, their greatest work and places of power being overrun by the horrific beings of the warp, tragically it manifested by the very creations that they had formed to save them. Among the most insidious of these entities were the Enslavers, who penetrated and dominated the minds of the younger races in order to open portals for themselves to the material universe. The plague of Enslavers was the final blow for the Old Ones, who were scattered forever, their power and knowledge destroyed. The combination of an unending onslaught from the Satan combined with the mistakenly unleashed warp horrors led to the Old Ones' complete destruction. The surviving Satan and Necrons had the final pleasure of seeing the demise of their most bitter enemy. Now after the destruction of the Old Ones, Zarek, lord of the former Necrontyr Triarch as you all remember, was left biding his time, waiting until the time was right to strike and lead a Necron revolt against the Satan. The Necrons focused the unimaginable energies of the living universe into cataclysmic weapons created from all their amassed knowledge that were too devastating for even the Satan, the godlike Satan, to endure. And these Satan, near gods, almost impossible to destroy entirely due to their very nature, were instead shattered across the universe into energy shards. Zarek now saw that having destroyed the Satan, the remaining new races created by the Old Ones, such as the Eldar, were becoming more powerful, knowledgeable and dominant. The Necrons, exhausted by eons of—
Wait, I thought the Necrons like imprisoned them into like big machine things. Or well, did they shatter the what you call them, and then trap the shattered pieces into beans or whatever? Don't know.
Of war could not stand against them. So rather than risk certain annihilation, he ordered that the Necrons withdraw into their tomb worlds and slumber in the Great Sleep,
Sleepy
to
time.
reawaken 60 million years in the future and assert their dominance over the galaxy once more. The Silent King, however, did not join his people in slumber. He destroyed a protocol that allowed him to control over the Necron race and journeyed out into the void of intergalactic space, where he may not find solace but instead penance for dooming the Necrontyr race in his deal with the now vanquished Satan. It was rumoured that the final Old One survived destruction from the Satan and Necrons. This survivor hid away where he continued his old ways of tweaking, dabbling and prodding around. Now we'll discuss about what he may have been doing in future content. When he was done with his work, he departed into the warp in order to hide and watch as the Old Ones knew the warp intimately. As the Necrons now retreated into stasis
Never heard
until
of
this
that
time
one
of
before.
cataclysm had ended, the lesser creations of the Old Ones, such as mankind, continued their own paths of development, to eventually rise as powerful forces in their own right. The mantle of galactic dominion would now pass to the Eldar, but the Eldar would survive where the Old Ones did not, and would see the last Necrons depart into their great sleep after they had turned on the Satan. Now that concludes our history of the Old Ones in Warhammer 40,000. This really is the foundation for all events that would follow and sets a lot of facts and implications into future events. So join me next time.
Okay, so I definitely do not think that this is a good. Honestly, I kind of think that the first Imperium of Man video, the one that I actually the one I watched as my first Warhammer 40k lore video, was actually a better introduction to the franchise than this one. And of course, ultimately, I do think Bricky's videos are probably the best introduction to it than Lewiton's videos. Lewiton's videos still come across, like, I still find myself kind of like, huh, what? With Lewiton's videos, whereas Bricky, I felt like explained them really well. Lewiton kind of just says it and doesn't really, kind of like, Lewiton doesn't explain it like Bricky does. And it's either I just vibe more with Bricky's way of explaining and don't with Lewiton, or it's just Bricky just explains it better in speaking terms for noobs like me. Lewiton just does not, which is fine, right? Lewiton's a fucking Warhammer 40k fucking man, has like a PhD, it feels like, in this stuff. But yeah, this one I feel like was not. This wouldn't have been a good starting point. I feel like this one would have left me just super confused. uh, and I feel like I was able to get a decent grounding with the Imperium of Man one. This video kind of, even after I've watched like a few Warhammer 40k lore videos, this video still left me pretty kind of confused. And a lot of this stuff was stuff we've already talked about, but like the way, I don't know, it was framed in this one seemed like, obviously, as he mentioned at the beginning, right, a lot of the information that we have available in Warhammer 40k is kind of, some of it is quite possibly misinformation and outright wrong, which I think is a very cool concept. But of course, what that leaves can potentially do and can be harmful is to audience understanding of what is happening, right? So that's where I currently stand after this video. I'm very lost. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.